Hey everyone, it's your buddy back again with another exciting fanfic, which is what if Naruto built a legendary harem with village beauties Hinata, Tenten and Hanabi, Part 1. If you enjoy this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more fanfics like this. Now, let's dive right into the fanfic. I do not own Naruto. Naruto's eyes winced as they opened, the harsh sun's rays trying to invade through his eyelids. As his vision became more focused, he could feel a substantial amount of pain forming in the back of his head. He tried to lift a hand to rub the sore spot, however his arm was incapable of moving. Looking at it, he found himself tightly tied to a tree with a thick strand of rope which was wrapped around his shoulders to his elbows, allowing his forearms to still have some form of movement. "Look who's woken up," said someone nearby, alerting Naruto that he wasn't alone. Looking up, he found himself facing the three bullies he had found picking on the young girl with dark blue hair a week ago. "We were beginning to think that we'd killed you with that hit to the back of your head." Naruto snarled at the situation. Here he was, 7 years old and tied to a tree with the current way to get out while three bullies stared him down with a pile of rocks littered at his feet. He was starting to realize that this may have been another one of those days that he'd end up getting mistreated at the hospital. "What do you want?" asked Naruto, trying to sound as if he still had some power in the situation. His response didn't come in words, however, as one of the bullies picked up a rock and threw it at Naruto, hitting him just above the right eye. Naruto grimaced through the pain as he felt blood trickle down his face as a flurry of rocks soared his way, most of which hit their target. A couple of minutes later, when the deed had been done, the bullies looked over the scene they had caused. The kid's head hung loosely while it looked like he gripped something with dear life in his right hand. Part of his hair had turned red from blood which dripped slowly into the grass below him. Sneering, they stepped forward to further inspect their prey. "Bet that teaches you not to mess with others' business," said one of the bullies as the ringleader grabbed Naruto by the hair and lifted his head up. What they expected to see was a broken boy sobbing his eyes out. They did not expect to see a snide smile across the boy's lips. "Is that all you got?" questioned Naruto, scaring the bullies to a certain degree. They thought they had defeated the boy both mentally and physically, but it seemed that the job was only half done. The reason behind this was not a pretty one, however. This treatment seemed mild in comparison to some of the beatings he received from drunks and adult civilians. Regaining his composure, the ringleader sent his spare fist careening forward, striking the boy across the side of the face, snapping his head to the side. His smile disappeared, however, as the boy raised his head once again to look him in the eye. Despite being more powerful and having dealt more damage, somehow the kid thought he was getting beaten. With a cry of rage, he drove his fist into the boy's stomach, sending a mixture of bile and blood to escape Naruto's lips. Naruto's head remained down for half a minute, and the bullies had finally thought the boy had cracked before Naruto's foot rocketed up and buried itself right between the bully's legs. An overly high-pitched scream escaped the boy's mouth as he dropped to the ground holding onto his jewels as if his very life depended on the swift recovery he needed. The other two, after seeing their leader downed, charged at Naruto and rained a platoon of punches and kicks at the immobilized boy. One sickening crunch followed by a flow of blood indicated that Naruto's nose had been broken. "What's going on here?" shouted a voice from nearby, alerting the bullies that someone else was in the vicinity. They found a girl standing there, from the looks of her just younger than what they were if only by a year. Her brown hair was tied up in two buns while her brown eyes were focused directly on the bullies in front of her as a scowl spread across her lips. She wore a pink blouse which didn't have any sleeves while she had jade green pants covering her legs. In her hand she carried a wooden bow staff with an intense grip which looked like splintering the weapon if she wasn't careful. By this time the leader had recovered from his life-threatening injury to look at the intrusion. "Look, Missy," he said slowly, still reeling from the pain. "This little punk deserves what he's getting, don't come." He was cut off, however, as Naruto leapt at him from behind and drove the bully's face into the ground. "Didn't expect that, did you?" shouted Naruto as the bully rolled over, allowing Naruto to deal 2 blows to the boy's face before he was pried off by his allies. Naruto did what he could to fend off the 2 bullies, but he was taking more damage than he was dealing. The ringleader looked like he was ready to join in the brutality before he took a large blow to the top of the head as the girl's weapon descended down on top of him. He turned around in anger before the staff hit him across the side of the face, knocking him to the side. Seeing his friend in danger, one of the two bullies attacking Naruto broke off from the assault and went to help. This was not the smartest of choices as he was unarmed and unskilled against fighting someone with a weapon. After having said weapon thrust into his stomach, he immediately regretted the decision. As he dropped to his knees, he felt the wooden staff crack along the side of his back, causing him to yell out in pain. This in turn distracted the final bully, allowing Naruto to capitalize and drive a vicious uppercut to the boy, sending him to the ground. Naruto stood upright, his face mangled and bloodied with swelling in multiple areas, but still the victor of the fight. The young girl came and stood next to him as the three boys made their escape, running to safety as quickly as they could with tears streaming down their eyes. Once they were out of sight, Naruto dropped to the ground and leant against the tree he was tied to earlier. "Are you all right?" he asked the girl compassionately. This was not the first thing she expected to hear from someone who looked like they had just stepped through hell. "I should be asking you that," she said, dropping her staff to the ground and looking at the battered boy closely. Naruto flinched out of instinct. It wasn't often that somebody got this close without malicious intent running through their mind. "Are you okay?" she said as she noticed his reaction. "I've had worse," said Naruto, putting on a brave smile, but the blood-stained teeth only seemed to scare the girl slightly. He reached around and grabbed a nearby branch and placed it in his mouth. Before the girl could ask him what he was doing, he grabbed the edges of his nose and shoved it back in place. An agonizing pain erupted from behind the branch, which muffled a majority of the sound. The girl was starting to worry about this boy as he took the branch from his mouth and chucked it to the side. She was wondering if her father's choice of moving here was the right one. They sat there in silence for a while before Naruto put his hand forth. "My name's Naruto, Uzumaki Naruto," he proclaimed proudly. "Tenten," replied the girl, taking the offered hand. "How did you get out of that rope?" she asked. "Before you got here, those jerks were throwing rocks at me and I managed to catch one of them after it hit me in the shoulder," explained Naruto with great enthusiasm, as if this was his greatest escape of all time. "When they were up close and distracted, I cut myself free. Pretty cool, don't you reckon?" he asked with a smile, careful not to show his teeth. "That's impressive," said Tenten honestly. She didn't know if she would have what it takes in order to remain calm and think of a way to escape in that situation. "Why were they doing that to you?" "I think it's because I stopped them from picking on someone a week ago, but pretty much every person who isn't a ninja tries to hurt me in some way," he explained modestly. Tenten could see the sadness in his eyes as he continued. "I don't have many friends and my parents died when I was young, I don't." He was cut off, however, as Tenten embraced him in a comforting hug, tears swelling in her eyes. "It's okay, Naruto, I'll be here for you," she said softly, causing Naruto to extend his arms around Tenten and hug her as well. Meanwhile, a young girl with dark blue hair, heir to the Hyuga clan, was looking at the situation from behind a tree. Hinata had seen the entire event unfold but had been too scared to do anything about it, and when this girl had appeared and helped the boy who had saved her, she hadn't been happier. Seeing the two hugging one another, she figured that now would be a good time to leave in order to ensure that her guardian didn't call for a search and rescue party. Although she couldn't help but wish that she had had the courage and strength to help the boy and be the one receiving the hug, even the thought of it brought a slight tinge of red to her cheeks. As Tenten and Naruto broke the hug, they got to their feet, preparing to leave the forest. "So where are you from, Tenten? I haven't seen you around," asked Naruto curiously. "My father is a merchant and we've been traveling as long as I can remember," explained Tenten as she bent down and picked up her staff. "He wants to settle down now and find a permanent spot to sell our gear." "Sounds great," said Naruto as the two left the forest, only for Naruto to receive a swift slap across the side of the face from a frantic woman. "You demon, how could you do that to my son?" shouted the woman at Naruto as he tried to figure out what just happened. She was about to deliver another slap when Tenten leapt in front of Naruto, shielding him from harm. "Get out of the way!" shouted the woman hysterically. "No!" proclaimed Tenten boldly. Naruto meanwhile couldn't believe that he was being protected from harm from his new friend. Your son and his friends were attacking him while he was tied to a tree, he deserved what he got. You're lying. My son would do nothing of the sort, shouted the woman. Naruto wanted to speak up, but he knew that whatever he said would be called a lie as always. Who spoke up next caught him completely by surprise. She's not lying, said Hinata shyly in just an audible tone. I saw the whole thing, they only acted in self-defense, she said, pointing at Naruto and Tenten. The lady looked at the children standing up to her. While she didn't mind getting into an argument with this brown-haired girl, however, she knew the blue-haired girl was the heir to the Hyuga clan. If she kept this up, she knew that if the actual clan got wind of this, it could spell disaster. With an audible growl of anger, she turned around and walked over to her son, cooing the boy and making sure his injuries were fine. Hinata walked over to where Tenten and Naruto stood before introducing herself. As she did so, she was unaware that her father had watched the confrontation from a hidden location. Hinata's guardian was just about to go and rescue her before she could interact further with Naruto before Hiashi placed a hand out and prevented him from moving further. Before he could ask for an explanation, Hiashi told him to watch from the sidelines and bring his daughter home in time for dinner. The guardian nodded in understanding before moving to get a better vantage spot. Hiashi couldn't help but wonder if this boy's impact on his daughter would help her grow a backbone and it to the clan heir she was destined to be. He turned and made his way back to the Hyuga compound, intent on telling the family that his daughter was now permitted to have contact with the Uzumaki boy. Thanks for helping us there, said Naruto, smiling in a way that his teeth weren't shown. He didn't want to scare off his friends anytime soon. I only did what was right, said Hinata bashfully as she looked at the ground, tapping her forefingers together nervously. It really helped. That lady looked like she wanted to strangle me, said Tenten. She then turned to Naruto and was about to say something before she noticed something. Didn't you have a cut above your eye? She asked, confused. I thought I did. I think the first rock they threw cut me there, said Naruto as he poked the spot which had been cut with his fingers. Guess it was just my imagination. Tenten and Hinata shared a look with one another before looking back at Naruto. There was a line of dry blood from just above his eye, but there was no wound from which it had emerged. Deciding to put it to the side for the moment, she focused on the mess that was Uzumaki Naruto. I guess we need to get you cleaned up, she said, looking at his face. She then turned her attention to Hinata. Want to help? The Hyuga heiress promptly fainted. Neji Hyuga contemplated over this new information. The clan head had called a meeting between all members of the clan as soon as he had come home before telling everyone, including the elders, that he permitted the children of the clan from interacting with one Uzumaki Naruto if they so wished. This had caused much outrage between the elders, and even some of the adults had voiced their opinion on the matter. A lot of people, however, agreed with what he was saying, however, confusing Neji greatly. They all seemed to be arguing over some point but made no reference to it as if it was taboo. He had always been told that to interact with the Uzumaki child would be messing with destiny itself, yet the head's words had held no malice for the boy but a tad of empathy, as if he regretted something. Deciding to take destiny into his own hands, he would go visit the boy the following day and see whether or not fate had once turned a blind eye to the child. This is your place, shuddered Hinata as she looked at the door before her. Tenten wished to voice her opinion as well, but her voice was caught in her throat. The door of which they saw had graffiti of which they never saw imprinted across it, words of which they didn't know the meaning of and having only heard drunk men utter them only to get slapped. One of the most common words though was demon, being written nearly half a dozen times in various shapes and sizes. You don't want to know what they mean, said Naruto, seeing the girl's shocked expressions. Fishing through his pockets, he found his keys before opening the door to his retreat. At least they didn't break in this time, he said, noting that the apartment was the same as how he left it. The girls could swear that the room had been broken into, considering the amount of mess which lay scattered across the ground and the broken window which allowed a chilled breeze to enter the room. The way in which Naruto entered the room, however, told them that this was normal for him, which scared them slightly. I'm going to wash up, so make yourselves at home, he gestured as he walked into the bathroom, leaving the room to the girls. They stood there silently for a moment, unsure of what to do. Hinata squealed in disgust as she saw a rat leap out of a bundle of clothes and make an escape towards a hole in the wall, but not before a kunai soared through the air and pierced the rat through the chest. Damn little creatures, said a lady from in the doorway, startling both Hinata and Tenten as they whipped around to see a woman with violet hair styled in a short spiky ponytail which stood upright. She wore a mesh bodysuit which stretched from her neck down to her knees. Over the top of that she wore a dull orange skirt and a tan coat which looked like the buttons had been removed for one reason or another. She rubbed the back of her head as a broad smile spread across her face, mimicking movements that Naruto had done earlier in the day. Is this Naruto's sister? Asked Tenten to Hinata in a little over a whisper. Hinata just looked at her with an equally confused expression, showing that she knew nothing about any of this. The woman opened her eyes and looked at the two young girls staring at her. She blinked a couple of times before the hand from behind her head balled into a fist. Doby, what the hell are you doing brining girls here when your place is such a pigsty? Shouted the lady as she charged at the bathroom door. We only really met Naruto today, said Hinata meekly yet loud enough that the lady calmed down somewhat. That's right, he had no time to clean up anything before we got here, said Tenten backing up Hinata's claim. The lady seemed to brood over this for a while before a snide smile spread across her face. Naruto, she said in a seductive voice, elongating the "oh" sound, you sly lady killer, brining not one but two girls home just after you met them. Remember to use protection. With neither Hinata nor Tenten having learned about the birds and the bees at this stage had no real clue about what she was talking about. What kind of dirty bastard do you think I am, Anko? Shouted Naruto from behind the door, causing the lady to chuckle. What's a bastard? Asked Hinata innocently, remembering it as one of the words which had been painted on the door. Anko backed away from the two girls, shaking her hands as if trying to fake her innocence. It's nothing you need to worry about, just forget it, she said, laughing as if to cover it up. It's nothing a Hyuga like yourself should know. How did you know I was a Hyuga? Asked Hinata, afraid that her privacy had been breached. Please, every Hyuga I've seen has the same eyes as you, a clan heirloom you might say, said Anko as she placed a hand on her hip while extending her other hand forwards. My name's Anko. Tenten, said the brown-haired girl taking Anko's hand. Hinata, said the Hyuga quietly, trying to keep her eyes away from Anko's face. That was a good shot before, said Tenten pointing to the dead rat. You have to be a good shot if you want to be one of the top kunoichi of the village, said Anko with a smile. What rank are you? Asked Tenten, warming up to the hyperactive woman. I'm Chunin rank at the moment and hopefully by year's end I'll have ranked up again. I could have already ranked up but due to some outside interference I had to wait a little longer, she said, looking away from the girls, as if hiding something. Respecting her privacy, Hinata changed the conversation topic. So how do you know Naruto? She asked. Naruto and I have mutual respect for one another, said Anko, trying to find the right words to talk about such a situation with children. We've both had our moments of darkness and we've been there to help each other. She recalled the first time she had met him 4 years earlier when she had been 10 years old, locked outside the orphanage as the caretakers had, apparently, gone home despite several lights still being on inside. When she had realized who it was and the trouble she knew he had gone through, she took him to her apartment and dried him off. She too had been a benefactor of the Hokage's kindness. He had later burst into tears, having never been cared for by someone before. In that instant she too had cried. She never knew the honest reason why, but she had a few suspicions, many of which if they were spread around the village would ruin her reputation. After Naruto had left the orphanage and given an apartment by the Hokage, she had opted to move into the room next to his so that if needed they could share their pain with one another, something neither of them had been able to open up to anyone about prior. I see him like I would a little brother. The door to the bathroom swung wide open to reveal a confused yet angry-looking Naruto. Who are you and what have you done with Anko? Shouted Naruto threateningly, knowing that people could alter their form with a jutsu. Anko growled with anger before she grabbed Naruto in a headlock and rubbed the top of his head with her fist. I can have my sentimental moments, she said through gritted teeth, not lessening her assault one way or another. Should we help him? Asked Hinata, worried about Naruto's safety at the hands of the ninja. Give it a couple of minutes, this is just them showing affection to one another, said Tenten, trying to believe the words she had just spoken. Nearly 10 minutes later, Anko released her hold on Naruto, his head red raw from the amount of attention it had been given. I think we should celebrate Naruto gaining some new friends. Who's up for some dango? Exclaimed Anko, desperate to get her lips around those juicy meaty balls. Her mind played dirty images in her mind about an older Naruto allowing her to taste his homemade balls, but she pushed the image to the side. No, we had dango last night, we need to go get some ramen. Said Naruto. We have guests this time, Naruto, they need to be treated to the food of the gods, said Anko. That's why we should take them out for some ramen, said Naruto in a matter-of-fact tone. Actually, you guys, it's getting kind of late and my father would start to worry about where I am, said Tenten, not wanting to be the cause between a fight between two people who seemed close. I should get going as well, said Tenten, blushing slightly. Anko and Naruto looked at the two girls who looked like they were out of place within the bomb shelter of a room. Well, how about I show you around the city tomorrow, Tenten? Offered Naruto, Anko smiling snidely from behind him. I'd like that, said Tenten, smiling politely. You can come as well, Hinata, offered Naruto, causing the Hyuga's cheeks to take a slight tinge of red. I'll see what my father says, said Hinata softly. She had been taken around the village multiple times, but always with a parental guardian, not someone who was the same age as her. Want me to walk you down to the main street? Offered Naruto, but his offer was cut short as Anko yanked him off the ground by his ear. If you're going to start bringing girls over, Naruto, you're going to make sure they come into a clean environment, she said menacingly, yanking him over to the mountains of trash that lay scattered on the floor. I guess I'll see you guys tomorrow, meet at the Hokage Tower around 9, he said with a cheeky smile. See you later then, said Tenten as she walked out the door. Goodbye, Naruto-kun, said Hinata as she quickly left as Naruto's head shot up, wondering why she had used an honorific in his name. Come on, Baka. Stop your daydreaming and let's get this place cleaned up, said Anko as she pried the kunai out of the wall, allowing the dead rat to slump to the ground. Naruto looked up at her before she rested a comforting hand atop his head. As if I'd leave you to do this yourself, you're more likely to shove everything in the cupboard to rot instead of cleaning up properly. Naruto's head dropped slightly. How she had figured out his plan left him confused, so she decided to pick him right up again. If we get this done within the hour, I'll treat you to a free bowl of ramen at that favorite place of yours, Ichiraku or whatever it's called. Wahoo! A free meal! Shouted Naruto for joy. I said one free bowl, not a free meal, idiot, complained Anko as she slapped Naruto playfully across the back of the head. Naruto grumbled slightly but decided not to complain. After all, it was a free bowl of ramen. Hey Dad, called Tenten as she entered her household, the smell of new furniture still crisp in the air. Hey darling, he said, grabbing her by waist and hugging her while he spun around. What did you end up doing in the end? I saw you had returned your staff at some stage while I was setting up shop, so I take it you found something to do. Yay, I managed to make a few friends today, she said proudly as her father put her down. Any boys? He said, nudging her shoulder slightly. Dod, moaned Tenten before she felt rough hands grabbing her stomach, tackling her lightly to the ground before they started to tickle her mercilessly. Come on, you can tell me, he said as he continued to tickle his daughter. Not telling, said Tenten through fits of laughter which would continue for several more minutes. I'm home, father, said Hinata softly as she bowed towards her father in respect. I saw you stand up for your friend today in the city, he said, his emotionless face making her feel like she was in trouble. I'm sorry, father, she said apologetically, fearing she had lost the respect for her father. She could hear his footsteps edging closer, and she looked down and prepared herself for whatever pain her father sought necessary to dish out. What she didn't expect, however, was a gentle hand to place itself comfortingly on her shoulder. Looking up, she saw a smile on her father's face, one of which was full of pride. Don't be, Hinata, you've reached out and helped another, there is nothing to be ashamed of, he said, knowing that if any of the elders had heard him they would scoff at his lackluster attitude towards anyone who affiliated with the demon host. Was today the first time you've talked to Naruto? There was one instance a week ago when the same bullies which attacked him today attacked me, she said, and her father had to restrain himself from finding each individual and nailing them to the side of the town walls as a warning. He composed himself and allowed Hinata to continue her story. I don't know what they were about to do, but Naruto attacked them and got injured in the process, and I was taken away before I could thank him properly. I see. Did he know who you were at the time? He asked. I don't believe so. I only introduced myself to him and his friend today. I was actually meant to be meeting up with them again tomorrow if that is alright with you, she said. By all means, Hinata, but instead of having a guardian follow you all day, you will be accompanied by Neji. He wishes to meet Naruto himself, explained Hiyashi. I understand, father, she said with a polite bow. Now let us go to dinner, he said, standing upright, his face returning to his normal stoic features. Hinata knew that this was just to make sure that nobody suspected him of anything, but she knew that from behind the exterior blank look he was smiling on the inside. She seethed as she sat on her bed, anger gripping at her every fiber. She had been humiliated in the town center, and while only a few had seen it, word was already spreading about how she had backed away from a challenge by a bunch of children. She had known that her son had attacked the demon brat, she had even pushed him into doing it, but that brat had the nerve to embarrass her like that. She knew she couldn't touch either the Hyuga or the new girl who had come to town, and to attack the demon brat in broad daylight was risky. She knew what she had to do to hurt it badly, make it realize some of the pain which it had caused others. He would watch as everything he had was destroyed. Hey Tenten, shouted Naruto, waving his hands excitedly as he signaled his friend over. Seeing her blonde friend in what seemed a trademark orange vest, Tenten picked up her pace to a brief jog until she was at her friend's side. How are you? Good, thanks, said Tenten appreciatively. Is your room tidy now? She asked with a small snicker, remembering how Anko had forced the boy into manual labor. Naruto seemed to pout slightly as he remembered the horrendous chore he had been forced through, and Anko had gone on her word in the sense that they hadn't finished quickly enough. As such, he had had to pay for all the ramen he had eaten by himself. That now served as a reminder to keep his room tidy, most of the time. Don't remind me, he sulked. What's the bet that Hinata asks you the same question? Said Tenten, stifling a giggle. Naruto huffed slightly, wanting to get off the topic. I wonder what the old man's doing today, Naruto said, looking at the tower. The old man, repeated Tenten. Are you talking about the Hokage? Yeah, he's always looked out for me, he's a really good man, said Naruto, smiling broadly, showing his now white teeth to Tenten. Now that Tenten was able to get a good look, she saw that many of his baby teeth had been replaced by the adult version. Sadly, after seeing how he was treated by the community the previous day, she was fairly certain that they hadn't come out naturally. One thing she took note of was his elongated and sharpened canines, but she figured it was just genetics since they seemed to fit so well. Is there something in my teeth? Asked Naruto, noticing that Tenten had been looking at him for a little while. I just thought you had a nice smile, said Tenten nervously, rubbing the back of her neck with a slight chuckle. Thankfully Naruto was distracted and didn't notice any of this play out. Hey there Hinata, yelled Naruto, noticing the Hyuga heiress coming towards them through the crowd. Tenten turned her gaze around to see the young girl walking steadily towards them, a boy with the same type of eyes walking alongside her. She could tell that since they had the same eyes and wore roughly the same type of clothing they were related, but while Hinata had a smile on her face, there was nothing but seriousness on the boy's. Hello Tenten. Hello Naruto-kun, said Hinata softly as they got close enough. This is my cousin Neji, she introduced the boy standing next to her. It seems it was our destiny to meet today, said Neji, offering Naruto his hand. Naruto looked at it warily, backing away ever so slightly as if something was going to happen. Neji sighed as he brought his hand back to his side. I suppose it is to be expected. I have heard stories of the torments which have already plagued your life, so one would expect you to be a bit skeptical. Glad you understand. Perhaps we can be friends after all, said Naruto, flashing another one of his cheesy grins. Hinata could see the corners of Neji's lips incline slightly before returning to their normal placid position. This was the first positive emotion she had seen him show in a long time. Neji, this is my friend Tenten, said Hinata, introducing the brown-haired girl. Nice to meet you, said Neji politely, as he had been taught in the branch house to talk to women. Likewise, and don't worry about Naruto backing away at first, he did the same to me yesterday, said Tenten. I see, and what about his first contact with Hinata, what happened then? Asked Neji, curious to know what had happened. She stood up for me yesterday, something which only the old man's Anbu do, said Naruto cheerfully. But yesterday was not the first time now was it? Stated Neji as if he already knew the answer. No. Well, he did rescue me from some bullies the other week and got injured in the process, said Hinata softly. Were you aware of who you were saving? Asked Neji bluntly to Naruto, as if expecting the young boy to have wanted a reward for saving the heiress. No, but I didn't need a reason to protect someone, said Naruto with gusto, proud of what he had done despite the fact he ended up unconscious. I see, said Neji deep in thought. In that case I wish to have a spar with you. A spar, said Tenten confused. Neji, said Hinata, unsure of what her cousin had planned. Looking at Naruto, she saw that his cheerful outlook had changed completely, his eyes were now focused intently on Neji. What's the catch? He asked, his voice not wavering in the slightest. No catch, I wish only to see if you are capable of defending my cousin from harm, he said, locking eyes with Naruto. Neji, you don't have to do this, said Hinata, trying to get him to change his tactics. It's alright Hinata, he challenged me and I accept, said Naruto boldly with a smirk across his face. After all, what type of ninja would I be if I didn't accept challenges like this? From your tone you make it seem as if you're going to win, said Neji, depicting the message behind Naruto's tone. By no means, however this is only a spar not a full confrontation, a test of our abilities, said Naruto, causing Neji's eyebrow to rise slightly. He had been taught to fight every battle to the fullest, whether they were friendly or hostile. Although now that he thought about it, all of the fights he had had were against people with much greater skill than him, meaning he would need to go all out in order to pose a threat. I take it you two both want to be ninjas then, said Tenten with her hands on her hips. Neji and I have a rich ninja background, dating back since the beginning of this village, said Hinata showing her extent of knowledge. Well at least I know I'm not the only kunoichi in years to come, said Tenten with a smile. Meanwhile Neji and Naruto had been ignoring the girl's squander, focusing only on the other opponent. Shall we make our way to a training ground? I would suggest the third since it is rarely used, said Neji. Naruto nodded before turning his attention towards the two girls. Are you two coming? He asked, noticing them talking to one another. They turned towards him and both nodded in acceptance. Naruto shifted his gaze back to Neji and gestured with his hand in an outwards motion. Lead the way. Neji nodded before starting to walk towards the specified training ground, Naruto following closely behind, Hinata and Tenten trailing him. From those who saw the procedure, to see the child outcast in the company of two of the children belonging to the Hyuga clan was very suspicious but thought nothing of it, all except for one pink-haired girl. Hey Ino, do you see that? Asked Sakura of her friend. The two of them were together since Sakura's mother and Ino's father were in the middle of the council meeting. Ino, who had been sniffing at some flowers at the time, turned her head to see what Sakura saw. What's going on? She asked in confusion of the scene, wondering why the ninja royalty were hanging out with the person nobody ever wanted to be associated with. I have no idea, answered Sakura, tilting her head slightly. What's say we find out? Said Ino with a cheeky grin. Sakura was about to retort, but realized that her mother would still be in the council for a long time to come. Since she was the head of the civilian half of the council, she needed to be there early and remain there afterwards, as such she would not be out for a solid 2 hours yet. As such she nodded her approval and the two girls started to follow the strange-looking group, keeping hidden as much as they could. We're here, announced Neji as they walked onto the training field. He turned to look at Naruto and noticed something different in comparison to when he had met him barely 20 minutes earlier. When he had first saw him, his eyes were relaxed but now they were sharp, as if they were taking in as much information about the surroundings as they could. An uncharacteristic grin spread across his face, maybe this would be better than he first thought. Naruto didn't respond at first, his eyes glancing over the terrain. There was a river in the distance and a lot of trees on either side of a large field. Close to where they were was a giant memorial stone and 3 logs separated at equal distances from one another. Near the posts were a number of logs, some of which had various number of sharp metallic objects driven into the wood. There was a gentle wind which made the grass sway lazily against one another while the sun bore down on this bright day. Naruto-kun, are you alright? Asked Hinata, noticing the serious expression on Naruto's face. In an instant, Naruto's face returned to its normal features, as if nothing had changed. What do you mean, Hinata? He asked with his normal tone, as if he hadn't changed at all. Before Hinata could respond, Neji beckoned him onto the field. Naruto followed, oblivious to the 2 young girls who had stalked them all the way here, who were now hiding behind a tree. What do you think's going on? Asked Sakura. Do you think they could be having a fight? Suggested Ino. A Hyuga versus Naruto, said Sakura, referring to Naruto's random childish pranks. I know Naruto's an idiot, but this would be questioning his sanity. What are you two doing? Asked Tenten, who had been looking at the 2 girls for the past half a minute as they whispered between one another. They both jumped up and suppressed a squeal of surprise at being caught out. You two weren't really hiding that well. We're not used to it, said Ino, trying to make it sound like it was fine. Tenten merely shrugged at the answer as Ino and Sakura came up to them. You're new around here, aren't you? Stated Ino, having not seen the brown-haired girl before. Raising her hand out, she introduced herself. Nice to meet you, I'm Tenten, she introduced, happy that she was meeting more people within such a short period of time. I'm Sakura, introduced the pink-haired girl with a smile as Tenten shook her hand. And you would be Hinata? Questioned Ino, looking at the Hyuga. That's me, said Hinata softly, unsure of how she was known. I thought I recognized you. I remember seeing you and your father before one of the clan meetings, said Ino, remembering where she had seen Hinata before. Realizing that she was talking to the daughter of another clan head, Hinata became slightly more relaxed about the situation. So what did you two come out here to do? Asked Tenten, getting back on track. We saw you guys with Naruto and were curious, said Sakura honestly. Just watch and you'll find out, it's just about to get to the best bit, said Tenten excitedly as she turned her attention towards the posts, only to find Neji and Naruto standing on the 2 farthest from one another. So how do you want to do this? Asked Naruto. Since it would be unfair to do so otherwise, I'll leave my Byakugan for another time. I shouldn't reveal all of my secrets in one go, Neji said confidently. Naruto nodded at this, but Neji saw this as a true challenge, as he had always fought with his Byakugan activated so he could always see his opponent. In that case I won't be using my major power either, said Naruto with a smirk, causing Neji to tilt his head slightly in confusion. Going against superior opponents, he was used to them only going at 20% of their maximum capacity. Here, however, there was a boy a year younger than him, who came from no major family, saying that he had some technique hidden for another time. If so, why hadn't he used it against the bullies when they had attacked Hinata? Although when he thought about it, he realized that since Naruto had been scrutinized a great deal of his life, if he was to use powerful techniques against someone with no ninja background, it could lead to a lot of trouble. Understanding this, he couldn't help but feel like he was gaining respect for the boy. Shall we begin? Asked Neji, leaping off the post and landing in his family's trademark fighting form. Naruto nodded before leaping parallel to him, dropping into an unusual stance. While Neji's was straight and direct, Naruto's looked like it was more fluid, no muscle was extended to its outright potential. Neji took this into account and was the first to charge forward, Naruto simply standing there waiting for Neji to come closer, but when Neji dealt a severe blow to Naruto's chest, it burst in a cloud of smoke to reveal a log with a piece of paper on it. Neji looked around wildly. He hadn't expected anything like this since he had been watching Naruto for a majority of the time. Picking up the paper, he read it silently. Didn't expect that one, did ya? Neji cursed silently under his breath. If he had had his Byakugan activated, he would have been able to tell that that had been an inanimate object. It wasn't hard to figure out he had swapped himself with one of the logs which had already been attacked before, but he had done it so well that Neji hadn't been able to tell the difference. Without his eyes though, however, for the first time in a long time, Neji felt vulnerable. In the middle of the city, Crowds began to line the streets intent on seeing the guests of honor arrive. They waited patiently, members of Anbu watching hidden on the rooftops and every sheltered area in case something went wrong. A cheer erupted from the crowd as the three men came into view, the head ninjas from Kumogakure who were to sign a peace treaty, signaling an end to the hostility the two villages had shown each other for so long. This was to be a day well remembered for more than one reason. Neji groaned as he looked around, rubbing the bandages across his forehead briefly. Without the use of his eyes, he was unable to locate Naruto easily and he realized why he was taught to use them so often. Without the use of the Byakugan, it was as if he couldn't see at all. Did Naruto use a kawarimi? Asked Ino, completely thrown out of the loop. A kawa what now? Asked Tenten in response. A kawarimi is a technique where you replace your body with that of an inanimate object, explained Sakura. It's one of the more basic techniques you need to survive in the ninja world. Naruto-kun is so cool, admired Hinata, a blush creeping across her face. You only learn that sort of stuff when we enter the academy, but you have to be at least 8 years old to enter, analyzed Ino, wondering how Naruto was able to execute a technique like that. So I'd be able to enter the academy now? Asked Tenten. They're halfway through this year though, said Sakura. Even if you were to enter you'd have to try and catch up half a year. Why don't you wait and join us next year? Are you all joining? Asked Tenten, looking at the three girls who gave a nod of approval, although Hinata returned to looking at the ground at a slight angle. Sounds like a plan then, she said with a smile before focusing back on the fight along with the other girls. What are you planning? Questioned Neji, reaching into his back pocket and grabbing hold of some blunted shuriken. Since he was only a first year at the academy, he was unable to be given anything which could fatally injure someone. Hearing the snapping of a twig, his hand shot out at a remarkable speed, flinging the shuriken in the designated direction. The girls watched on as they saw the shuriken fly towards the charging Naruto. Neji smirked as he watched the flying object fly towards Naruto, only for the Uzumaki boy to twist in midair, his arm lifting upwards to catch the shuriken on his index finger. Before Neji's face could change to show his confusion, Naruto had finished rotating and flung the shuriken back at Neji. Acting on instinct, Neji shifted to the side, just dodging the projectile as it brushed past his clothing, ripping the fabric slightly. Shifting his attention back to the charging Naruto, who was now within range, he sent a strike straight towards Naruto's forehead, only to hit nothing but air. Before he realized what had happened, Neji felt his knee buckle as Naruto drove his heel into the vulnerable area. Dropping to one knee, Neji managed to raise his hands in time to grab the arm which was intent on being a follow-up strike. Using the limb to his advantage, Neji pulled himself upright and in doing so pulled Naruto past him, opening up the boy's back. Without hesitation, Neji hit Naruto's back 3 times, but without the sight of his Byakugan he was unable to deal any critical damage. Naruto stumbled a bit before regaining his footing and turning around to face Neji, only to find the Hyuga charging at him, delivering a solid kick to Naruto's chest which sent him back several feet. Naruto composed himself and got back into his stance, a smirk spread across his face. It would seem I underestimated you, said Neji, shifting his weight slightly to his good leg. He was proclaimed at the academy as a possible prodigy, one of which Itachi Uchiha had been when he was at the academy. To have someone who was younger than him fight on equal grounds, nobody at the academy would believe it, but they weren't here to witness it. Neji couldn't help but wonder, since he was considered a prodigy, what would be the appropriate name that would be given to Naruto. Putting it to the side for the moment, he adjusted into the family stance and fixed his gaze on Naruto. You're not so bad yourself, said Naruto, never actually having heard of the prodigy that was the Hyuga in front of him. He had tried to gain access to the academy early, but they had refused him entry. Accessing his chakra, Neji made a quick hand signal. Bunshin no Jutsu, he shouted before 2 copies of Neji popped into existence. With his knowledge of replications, Naruto deduced that only one would be able to do damage to him, as only one of them had a physical body. He knew there were ways to figure out which one it was, but he had no time to work it out as they all charged forward. Naruto weaved in and out of the 3 attackers, not wanting to be hit by any in case it was the real one. A flicker of movement was all Naruto needed before he leapt forward, driving his knee into the chin of the real Neji, forcing his clones to burst from existence. Hinata squealed in delight while Tenten shouted for joy as Neji hit the ground hard on his back. Ino and Sakura, however, were stoic. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Neji winced as he opened his eyes, the harsh sun's rays blaring into them until Naruto blocked his view. A smile spread across his face. "How did you know which one was me?" asked Neji weakly, his jaw feeling numb from the blow. "You hesitated slightly when you landed on your right leg, the one I had hit earlier," explained Naruto. "The other two kept pushing forward without difficulty while you limped ever so slightly." "It seems you are quite observant," said Neji. "I guess it was destiny that I was defeated today. Don't use that as an excuse in a real fight," said Naruto, offering Neji a helping hand. Neji took the offered limb as Naruto hoisted him onto his feet. "Destiny cannot be the judge of our bouts. It is all decided by whether or not we are strong both mentally and physically in order to beat our opponents. Not only that, but is also the courage to never give in, to keep fighting even when you know you are past your limit. Destiny doesn't decide how strong we are, it is our own decisions which help mold us into what we are today." "I'll keep that in mind," said Neji, absorbing the information. Perhaps this street urchin was wiser than he appeared to be. "It seems that the crowd has gotten bigger," said Naruto, looking over Neji's shoulder at the small group of people who had followed. The sound of clapping from behind them, however, shook their attention the other way. Naruto and Neji watched as four kids roughly Neji's age appeared from the undergrowth of the forest. "You know them," whispered Naruto to his fighting comrade. "They're in my class," said Neji back, not taking his eyes off the approaching ninjas in training. "Isn't this a sad day, to see the top of our class beaten by a mere kid," said the ringleader. Naruto and Neji said nothing in response, which seemed to irk the intruders somewhat. "Got nothing to say in your defense, Neji, pathetic." "Why would you care?" said Neji, breaking the silence he had maintained. "The facts still remain. If Naruto here was able to beat me, then you would be defeated too." "Do you really think that outcast could beat me?" shouted the leader as his friends chuckled behind him before he slipped into his stance. "Not only will we beat him, by the time we're done there won't be anything left of him." Behind him, his three friends dropped into their respectful stances, each more elaborate than the others. Naruto sighed as he picked up a branch which had been snapped off of the kawarimi he had used earlier. In a fluid motion, he tossed the branch forward to have it bury within the leader's stomach, knocking the breath out of him. Neji smirked as his eyes altered slightly, the Byakugan flaring into existence. "You'll pay for that," shouted one of the lackeys as the three of them charged forward, followed closely by the leader who had recovered slightly. Anger burnt brightly in his eyes. Nobody made a mockery of him. Neji slipped into his stance, as did Naruto, as they stood side by side as the first of the attackers leapt at them. That was amazing," said Tenten as they walked back towards the town as a group. Neji and Naruto didn't seem to mind that the number of people they were with had gone up. "Can you teach me some of that taijutsu, Naruto?" asked Ino, impressed with her blonde counterpart's fighting skills. "I'd like to learn as well, Naruto-kun," said Hinata, aware that her father would prefer if she remained loyal to the family fighting style. Neji seemed to frown slightly but let it pass. While he and Naruto had been fighting together, he had noticed that Naruto had shifted into 3 different stances depending on the situation. Not only that, but he had done it with little stress, flowing into one from the other, making him think that he should learn some more stances in case the need arose. "We'll see what happens," said Naruto, rubbing the back of his head. He was happy that he had been able to stretch his legs out in a worthwhile battle. He had been training for a while, but since none of the senior ninjas were willing to teach him, he had had to effectively teach himself. This had been done by watching others fight one another and mimicking the movements before shifting it in order to form his own techniques built for someone his height. He had nowhere near enough skill to take on a genin or anything like that, but it would come with time. "I would like to spar with you again," said Neji. "I believe I was able to learn some valuable lessons from my defeat." "It was only a spar, Neji. There are no winners or losses, it's just a test to try out one's skills against another," said Naruto, not liking the idea that he had defeated someone he had called a friend in a fight. Those other four who were writhing in pain back at the training ground, he was willing to call that battle a solid victory. I can't help but notice that you seem to change characteristics whenever fighting is mentioned, said Neji, causing Naruto to subtly twitch involuntarily. Any reason to this? I hadn't noticed, said Naruto quickly as if he was hiding something. This was picked up almost instantly by everyone around them, but they let it slide. If he didn't want to say something, they wouldn't force him. I wonder if the council meeting is over yet? Asked Sakura, changing the topic. It won't be over for a while, said a new voice, startling those already there. Neji and Naruto leapt in front of the girls in a protective barrier as if instinctual. Don't you look like a solid pack, said the girl, now stepping out into the open. She had two red fang symbols tattooed to her cheeks, the sign of the Inuzuka clan. She had sleek brown hair which stretched past her shoulders in a tightly knit ponytail, and for her young age she already had a respectful bosom which Ino and Sakura couldn't help but be jealous at. By her feet scampered three puppies which looked up excitedly at the six kids. Are you related to Kiba? Asked Naruto, who had played with the young boy at the park a few times. He's my younger brother, she said proudly. My name's Hana, she introduced. And these are my partners, the Heimaru brothers. We've just been out here doing a bit of extra training. Pleasure to meet you, said Hinata, bowing slightly. Nice to meet you, I'm Naruto, said the boisterous boy loudly. Hana smirked at this. I know all about Uzumaki, Naruto. Kiba tells me quite a bit about you. Not only that, but your name manages to irk a lot of people around the marketplace, yet they have never so much as talked to you. They have no right to talk about you behind your back. Thank you, said Naruto bashfully, already liking this woman. Excuse me, how old are you? Asked Ino. I'm 11, at the end of this year I'll be in my final year at the academy, answered Hana, causing Ino and Sakura's jaws to drop, hardly believing that a woman only 4 years older had the bust of someone in their late teens. How old was Anko? Hinata asked Naruto in barely more than a whisper. She's 13, I think. She'll be 14 in a couple of months, answered Naruto, wondering why Hinata had brought this up now. What do you mean by the council won't be finished for a while? Asked Sakura, snapping out of her stupor. Today we've got some guests from Kumogakure. They're here to sign a peace treaty before they leave tomorrow morning, said Hana. I think they arrived a little while ago and went straight for the council meeting. Peace is a wonderful thing, said Tenten. Having moved from town to town, she and her father always had to be wary about rivalries the town might have had with somewhere else. Hana was about to add onto that when her head shot towards town, sniffing wildly. I smell something, she said, inhaling deeply. It smells like smoke. The children followed her example, but at first they couldn't smell anything, unaware of the Inuzuka's keen sense of smell. But slowly, the vile smell of something burning filled their nostrils. Come on, let's go, said Naruto, charging forward, the rest of them only a step behind. When they reached the town and were out of the forest, they could see a thick plume of smoke reaching high into the sky. Wasting no time, they made their way towards the inferno with the intention to help in any way that they could. Anbu, with knowledge in water jutsu, made their way towards the fire, quickly applying their skills as soon as they got to the area. As they arrived to where the fire was occurring, all the color in Naruto's face was drained as he watched fire burst out of his apartment window. Dropping to his knees, he began to silently weep as tears swelled in his eyes. Naruto-kun, said Hinata softly, as if sharing Naruto's pain. Tenten was about to comfort him in a hug, but Hana beat her to it, lightly wrapping her arms around Naruto, allowing his head to rest against her breast, much like how a mother would tend for her child. The younger girls could only watch on before kneeling beside the crying boy. Neji remained standing, watching the Anbu extinguish the fire, but with the amount of smoke which had been coming out of the apartment building, it was doubtful that anything could be salvaged. There was a commotion going on nearby where a woman was fighting against some ninja who were restraining her. She was yelling all manner of curses and words of hatred towards what she called the demon child. She was quickly apprehended and taken away, no doubt to the interrogation department. It was clear that she had been the one who had started the fire and had known what she had been doing, but why would she target Naruto and call him such things? Neji pushed these thoughts back, noticing that Anbu had started to move in to investigate. He took one look at the girls comforting Naruto before going to investigate himself. He made his way through the crowd. Two Anbu were having a hard time restraining a violet-haired woman who was shouting a number of profanities, claiming how she was going to kill the bitch who did this. Neji concluded that her apartment must have been close to Naruto's or they were friends despite the fact that she was several years older. He had to smile at this possibility. Even though he had only officially met him today, he had discovered that he had a way to make people warm up to him. Seeing that the Anbu had the place well guarded as they investigated the inside, Neji scaled a nearby water pipe and made his way on top of a neighboring roof in order to get a better look. The door to the apartment was closed, but Neji saw all he needed to see by the writing painted on the door. Those he did know were disgusting in their own right, the words he couldn't understand. He wasn't sure if he wanted to know what they meant. Seething in disgust, he knew that this wasn't destiny for a child younger than he to be hated so much. Having seen enough, Neji started leaping across rooftops. He needed to speak with his father about possible accommodations for the Uzumaki boy for the night. Minutes passed as the commotion died down and Hana looked at the boy in her arms to find that he had fallen asleep crying, as if his dreams were the only comfort he could find. Looking at the other girls who noticed Naruto's condition, she spoke softly as to not wake him. Where's a place where he can rest quietly for a while? My house is only a couple of blocks down the road, said Sakura. He can rest there until he wakes up. Sounds like a plan then, said Hana, gently scooping the young boy into her arms, the Heimaru brothers watching as she did. Would it be alright if we wait with him until he wakes up? Asked Hinata, worried about the Naruto's safety. I'm sure my mum won't mind, said Sakura as she started walking home, beckoning for the rest of them to follow her. Should we wait for Neji? Asked Tenten, noticing that their partner was missing. He'll be able to find us, said Hinata before noticing Naruto squirming slightly. Let's hurry, said Ino, walking at the front alongside Sakura, having been to her house many a time before. Without another word, the young group of people walked towards Sakura's place with a stride in their step. Is he heavy? Asked Tenten, wanting to know if she could help in any way. Actually, I don't think it's normal for a boy his age to be this thin, said Hana, having carried Kiba around when he was younger. You mean he's malnourished? Said Hinata, worried. We can't make any assumptions yet, said Hana. Have you guys realized we've been getting a lot of funny looks? Said Ino, noticing the people staring at them with disgust. Looking around, all of the girls could see that they were being avoided, as if they carried the plague. Hana even noticed that parents of her classmates seemed to be looking at her with disgust. This worried them. They were unsure of what they had done wrong, if anything. We're here, said Sakura, pulling out a key and opening the front door. She stepped through and swung the door wide, allowing her guests to enter freely. Put him on the couch in the living room. I'll go get a spare blanket from upstairs, instructed Sakura as she closed the door after Tenten, who had been the last to enter, came through. Hana nodded in understanding, doing as she was told as Sakura silently made her way up to her room. Ino, Tenten and Sakura sat down at the kitchen table as Hana placed Naruto gently down in the next room. As Hana returned to the kitchen, Sakura had come down from the second story with a blanket in hand. Moving into the living room, she found Naruto crawled up in a ball on the couch as if frightened. She couldn't blame him. Many of the young girls were told to stay away from Naruto's place by their parents, her own mother included. As she put the blanket over him, easing his pain slightly, she couldn't help but wonder why she had always been told to stay away from him. Her mother had never given her a genuine explanation, and this scared her. Why would her mother tell her to avoid someone her own age yet not tell her why? Sakura brushed Naruto's hair out of his eyes before leaving the room, to find the other four girls sitting silently at the kitchen table, and she couldn't blame them. If it hadn't been for Naruto, chances are that the five of them wouldn't have made friends amongst themselves for a number of years, if at all. Sakura took her seat in between Tenten and Ino, joining the girls in their silence. While they wanted to get to know more about one another, they weren't willing to do so if it could accidentally wake up Naruto. Nearly half an hour passed as they sat there. Not a word spoken between them, but the silence they shared helped them understand the mutual respect they had for one another and for Naruto. The silence would change, however, as the door to the house opened once more to reveal none other than Sakura's mother, the head of the civilian council, and the constant voice of disapproval to whatever a certain blonde-haired kid did. Miss Yukihiro Haruno. Yukihiro stood in the doorway, slight confusion on her face as she looked at the four girls who sat beside her daughter. While she was happy that she had been making new friends, she could have picked civilian ones instead of the daughters of ninjas who no doubt would fill her head full of rancid dreams. She didn't mind the Yamanaka girl. She too enjoyed making herself beautiful, and her father wasn't annoying in the council room since he usually rested alongside the head of the Shikamaru clan, who considered anything non-ninja related to be too much of a hassle to argue for or against. The other two ninja girls were a bit of a worry, and while one of them was her age, she was the daughter of the Hyuga, a powerful family within the ninja community. The eldest one was the Inuzuka, and if she had the characteristics of the Inuzuka that was in the council, she would be loud and boisterous and stand against everything she said. Yukihiro couldn't believe it sometimes. She was the head of the civilian half of the council, and she always had facts and figures to support her claims. This always bought the support of the civilian half of the council, but most of the time the ninja half of the council disagreed with what she was saying simply due to the fact that it wouldn't benefit the community as a whole. This irked her on many occasions, due to them making her feel as if her part in the council was simply a name, a facade in order to make the community happy. Sure, some of her suggestions would get shut down by the ninja side of the council. She had tried to make it so that only children from ninja clans were allowed access into the Ninja Academy, effectively trying to shut her own daughter out of the program. Like most of her suggestions, however, this was shot down in flames. She had even tried to get the age of entry to the academy changed so that they had to be at least 12 years old when they began, the year that they currently graduated at. She had never heard the Inuzuka bitch yell so loud before. Just like the animals she kept, she had the ferocity of a wild beast. Then there were the situations with the Uzumaki filth. Even though the ninja council found him annoying at times, they weren't willing to punish the boy as severely as he should have been. She wasn't blind though. She knew what happened to him in the middle of the streets nearly every week, but he just didn't seem to learn. It was that lack of respect for the community, no doubt due to the poisoning constantly infiltrating his system, which that constantly pissed her off, and every time she saw him she just wanted to throttle some sense into his being. That and the fact that his prisoner was also the reason she was a war widow. "This is unexpected," said Yukihiro as she closed the door behind her. "Who are your new friends?" she asked, almost spitting the last word out. "Mum, this is Hinata, Hana and Tenten," she said, introducing each person individually. Yukihiro's gaze remained on Tenten, her features looking like nobody on the ninja council. Maybe amongst all these new friends of hers she'd managed to make one with a person who didn't aspire to be a ninja. "Hinata, Tenten and I are going to be in the same ninja class next year." "Then again, maybe not. Next year you say? I thought I told you I wanted you to wait another year before entering the academy," said Yukihiro calmly as she made her way to the kitchen. "Miss Haruno-san," said Hinata, speaking up. "It's common for children to enter the academy when they turn 8. "It's common. That does not mean that it's either correct or right," said Yukihiro, speaking like a true diplomat. "I've been at the academy for 3 years now, and despite a couple of cuts there has been nothing dangerous," said Hana, the pup circling her feet growling at Yukihiro as she walked closer. "Yes, but children shouldn't be put in any danger when they are your age. They shouldn't even worry about scraping their knees when they fall off the swing set," said Yukihiro as she placed an elbow on the table and rested her chin on her palm. "Instead, you are forced to analyze every situation and make the correct choice, otherwise risk losing your life." None of the girls at the table replied to this, not wanting to give her more fuel to add to the fire she was building. Eventually it was Tenten who spoke up. "Shouldn't you allow Sakura to go to the academy next year, considering she will be with her friends?" she asked. "She can make friends with people younger than her the following year," said Yukihiro in a rushed manner, as if setting the law. "Or is it someone my age who you don't want me to see?" stated Sakura in a matter-of-fact tone. She watched as a sly smirk spread across her face, the devil's advocate clearly at work. "You're simply using your imagination, like you should for a girl your age," she said in a motherly tone which had a hint of hatred built up behind it, as if Sakura's comment had gotten under her skin slightly. "You don't want her to be in the same class as Naruto," said Hana boldly, no hint of doubt in her voice. "Mum tells me about stories which go on in the council room and how you're trying to push it through that Naruto doesn't even get accepted into the academy." It's for his own safety, said Yukihiro, standing straight up, assuming a dominating position. You've seen what the people in the street do to him. Imagine if a chunin at the academy had similar views. Do you think he would survive knowing that the people who are meant to guide him are out for his blood? While her comment put up a solid point, to Hinata and Hana it seemed well rehearsed. Ino was tempted to use her family jutsu to delve into her friend's mother's mind and find out the truth herself, but that could backfire on her badly. It wasn't that she didn't know how to use it, her father had taught it to her at a young age so she could learn the family jutsus early in life. It was just using it on a civilian without proper authority could have negative consequences. Ino had remained silent throughout the conversation, picking up every slight hint of doubt in Yukihiro's voice. Like Hana, her father had told her a lot of stories about how Naruto was berated constantly by the civilian council, Yukihiro often at the forefront. If she was to walk into the living room to find Naruto recovering, it would be a horrible thing. It would be equally bad if Naruto was to wake up and stumble unwillingly into the kitchen due to the hatred and abuse which would be targeted at him by the older woman, and this in turn would get Sakura in trouble. She began to try and figure out a way to get Naruto out of there without much of a hassle, but it wouldn't be easy. Unfortunately, she didn't have the smarts of her father's teammate or his son, who was rumored to be a genius in the making. The only real problem with the entire family was that they were lazy. Why does everyone hate Naruto so much? Asked Hinata innocently. This put Yukihiro back a couple of paces due to the fact she couldn't say the truth, but there wasn't really a conceivable lie she could create. She could say that his birthday corresponded with the attack of the Kyuubi, which was part of the truth, however it also put the citizens in a bad light. So instead she opted to say a different truth. People hate him for many reasons, but they all center into one aspect of his being. I would tell you it, but I like my head where it is, she said, knowing that if she went any further she would be executed for breaking the Hokage's law. The girls looked in content at this. Clearly there was something about Naruto that made him hated, but there was a possibility that he didn't even know what it was. That would be one of the reasons why he never struck out at those attacking him, just because he wanted to be accepted. Yet the answers they had been given only lead to more questions. It was obvious when she had finished her statement that she wasn't permitted to say any more. This in itself led to a lot of questions, many of which could be further broken down into subcategories. Ino gripped her temples in frustration. She needed Shikamaru here to decipher the hidden messages. Ino felt a sudden pain in her shin. One of the puppies had clawed at her, but not too hard so that she didn't squeal in pain. Her eyes turned and focused on Hana, who tilted her head lightly towards the living room. Clearly she had thought was thinking along the same lines as Ino as to how to get Naruto out of there in one piece. So what's it like being in the council? Asked Hana. Why do you ask? Asked Yukihiro in response. In a couple of years, if my mother is out on missions, I might be required to take her place for a couple of meetings. I'd thought I'd ask you what to expect, said Hana. Yukihiro smiled, thinking that perhaps this girl would actually show some interest in the council and, unlike her mother, could be reasoned with. Ino, however, realized that if Hana wanted to know how the council worked, she would ask someone on the ninja side of it. In other words, she was giving her time. Pushing her chair back, Ino stood up. Excuse me for a minute, I just need to use the restroom, she said, turning and walking off into the living room which connected to the bathroom. As such, it wasn't suspicious. Yukihiro paid it no part as she started to describe what happened in the council and had the attention of the girls around her, although with three of them with family in the council it was no surprise. Ino paced back and forth in the living room, Naruto still sleeping soundly although the blanket had been half kicked off at some stage. She thought about why Hinata had targeted her specifically instead of doing it herself. There was a window that they could escape out of, but if she tried to carry Naruto she might knock something over, which in turn would alert Yukihiro and it would be game over. Suddenly it clicked and she had to resist slapping her head in stupidity. She had her mind transfer jutsu she could use. She didn't have the chakra to use it on a person who was conscious for an elongated period of time, but if the person was asleep she would be able to get him out of there with little difficulty. Sitting down on the floor as to not make a noise when she transferred body, she cupped her hands in her family's signature pose. Shintention no jutsu, she said quietly before her body slumped forward as if in a meditative position. Seconds seemed to pass before Naruto's eyes shot open, his body now in the control of Ino. Silently, he placed the blanket on the floor before tiptoeing towards the window, pushing it open slightly, grateful that it didn't squeak in the slightest. Taking a quick look over the shoulder to make sure that her body was okay, Ino made her escape in Naruto's body into the alleyway. Looking around, she needed a place to hide Naruto's body so that it wouldn't be found by anyone. From what she had heard of the sufferings that Naruto had gone through from her father, she didn't want to leave his body prone to attack. She decided that the roofs would be the safest bet and there would be little chance of any civilians up there that could do any damage. Seeing a box of crates, she decided to use that as her leverage point and leapt towards it, however the strength behind Naruto's legs was much unlike her own. Unfortunately, since she didn't close the window, the sound could be heard from within the Haruno household. The legs were like springs and propelled her over the boxes, smashing her stomach into the corner of a wall as she did. She dropped to the floor and coughed up a bit of blood. Likewise, her body did the same thing as blood trickled down her lips as Yukihiro came in to investigate along with Hana, who would try to become an expert bullshit artist within a matter of seconds. She rubbed her head, as if trying to push the pain away. She looked at the carnage she had caused, boxes all but destroyed from the force of her jump. As she stood up, she looked down at Naruto's body, as if confused about what had happened. She had jumped the approximate distance she thought she would have to for her own body to land on the first one, but had ended up going through the top one. Turning to the parallel walls, she contemplated her options as she heard voices coming from the end of the alleyway. Acting as if on instinct, she jumped onto the right-hand wall before pushing off to the left-hand side before pushing off again, landing on the roof and just out of view as the villagers came to check on the carnage. Ino panted frantically, thinking that if she had been caught, whether or not she would have the courage to go through the beating in Naruto's place as he slept. She was curious to know how she had done the leaping off the walls, but she figured since Naruto often had to escape from unruly mobs, he had to learn certain escape routes. His body must have realized the danger it was in, and all Ino needed to do was think of it and the body would do the rest. This of course wouldn't be the case if she had greater chakra control, but at the moment she was happy that she did. "Naruto, are you okay?" asked Neji as he leapt across the rooftops. Ino turned her head around to see the Hyuga coming towards her. "Neji, it's Ino," she explained in a feminine voice which startled him momentarily. "It was getting tight, so I had to get him out of there." "Where have you been?" "I've just spoken with my father and uncle to see whether or not it would be acceptable for Naruto to stay at our house tonight due to the recent incident," he said, speaking the last word with venom. "They seem to understand, so Naruto will be staying with us for the night." "That's good to hear," Ino said, although had Neji not gone and done that, she would have likely asked her father the same question. "Hey guys," shouted Hana as the rest of the group minus Sakura ran along the rooftops, having found various ladders and ways to make it up quickly. Even the Heimaru brothers had somehow managed to get on the roof. In Hana's hands she carried the unconscious Ino carefully. Sakura wanted to come as well, but her mother told her to stay behind. "That's okay. How'd you get my body out?" asked Ino, looking at herself. "When I saw you unconscious with the blood on your lips, I said that you needed to be taken to the hospital, so we quickly made an exit out the front door," explained Hana. "I'm not sure if it worked though. Miss Haruno-san looked like she knew something was up," said Hinata. "Well, we made it out. That's the important thing," said Tenten. "Alright then. I can feel Naruto starting to stir, so I'm going to disengage. Tenten, can you catch me?" asked Ino as she interlocked her fingers. Tenten nodded as she positioned herself roughly where Naruto's body would fall. "Kai!" shouted Ino as Naruto's body dropped limply into Tenten's arms as she blushed slightly. She had never had a boy this close to her before. A few moments passed before Hinata raised a very important question while Tenten gently rested Naruto on the roof. Shouldn't she be back in her body now? All eyes focused on Ino as Hana placed her by the sleeping Naruto, no signs of consciousness showing from either. "Something's not right," said Neji, confirming Hinata's worries. It was clear that Ino had disengaged the jutsu, but somehow she hadn't returned to her body. If that was the case, shouldn't she still be in control of Naruto's body? They looked at one another, as if hoping one of them could provide an answer, but none was given. All they could do was wait. A droplet fell on top of Ino's head, causing her to spin around frantically, her feet dragging in the foot of water which covered the entire floor. The entire place was damp and dark. What little light there was came in through vents in the ceiling. The walls were a monotonous gray and several gaps in them allowed entry into different areas. Ino couldn't help but raise her hands to her chest, her hands intertwined with one another so tightly that the blood flow to her fingers had stopped. "Where am I?" she asked, only for her voice to echo down the isolated corridor with no clear exit. Was she scared in her predicament? No, she was downright terrified, fear circling through her entire being. Putting on a brave face, she stepped through the water in search of a way out. "Sakura, could you come here for a second, dear?" called Yukihiro from the living room. Sakura swallowed slightly, fearing that Ino had accidentally broken something when she had smuggled Naruto's body out. It hadn't taken her long to work out what had happened, she only feared that her mother had worked it out as well. "What is it, Mum?" asked Sakura as she came into the room. "Could you explain why there is a blanket from your room down here instead of on your bed?" she asked, piercing eyes daring Sakura to slip up. Sakura's mind tried to think of a reasonable answer in the little time she had. No matter what she said, it would backfire on her if her mother kept pushing for answers, which no doubt she would. "I'm waiting," said Yukihiro, starting to lose her patience. "Well, you see, it was," stuttered Sakura, unable to think of anything convincing. Yukihiro nodded her head, everything starting to fit together like the pieces of a jigsaw. Moments later, a resounding crack could be heard coming from inside the Haruno household. We need to take them somewhere safe, analyzed Neji. He didn't feel safe out here in the open. It wasn't so much the fact that civilians could no longer find them, it was more about what would happen if they were to be found by anyone on top of a roof with two people unconscious. Naruto unconscious, from what he had seen, people might turn a blind eye to it, but for a clan head to be knocked out was never a good sign. "Where would nobody be at this time of the day?" asked Tenten, still not used to the town. Sashi had no answer. Hana contemplated saying her place, but it was on the complete other side of town. They would be seen at some point and then questions would be asked. "We need to calm down and think this through," said Hinata. "Just relax for a moment." Hana inhaled deeply, following the Hyuga's advice. This didn't last long when their peace was interrupted. "What the hell happened to Naruto?" shouted someone from nearby, alerting everyone of another's presence. Hana kept her guard up, prepared to protect a member of her current pack, but Hinata and Tenten relaxed when they saw it was Anko. Neji looked at her bemused, wondering how anyone was allowed to wear such revealing clothing in public. "Anko, it's good to see you, we need your help," said Tenten, pleading to the older Kunoichi. "What happened to Naruto?" stated Anko, demanding an answer. "He saw his apartment on fire," said Hinata. I think his body might have shut down to help him." Anko rested her chin in the ball of her hand. "Makes sense, I guess. His mind would have been under a lot of stress and it would have switched itself off in order to allow him to protect not only himself but those around him." "What do you mean by those around him?" asked Neji. "Naruto has been picked on and discriminated against for years, well past breaking point," explained Anko. "In order to help him vent his frustration, I've been teaching him taijutsu and basic ninjutsu. He goes out every now and again and just trains against things like trees, kicking them in the same spot hour after hour. I found him once focusing on right crosses while tears streamed down his eyes and blood trickled off his knuckles. I had to stop him before he did any permanent damage." "Naruto," said Hinata, trailing off as she looked at the unconscious boy. Neji could see sorrow in Hinata's eyes and in turn felt for his cousin before returning to Anko, unwilling to show any major signs of emotion. "So you're saying this incident might have pushed him past breaking point and he would have gone on a rampage," analyzed Hana. "That's right," said Anko. "But is that a bad thing?" asked Tenten. "Shouldn't he be allowed to get angry at those who hurt him?" "The problem with that is that he doesn't want civilians to know that he is already training to be a ninja. According to my sensei, the civilian council is trying to deny Naruto the rights to go to the academy until he become more mature. If they found out he was training on his own, it would give them verbal accusations to help push their claim," said Anko. "And he knows about this?" asked Neji, referring to his fellow male. "I don't think so, but he wants to keep his skills hidden as if to shock everyone when the time comes, said Anko. I could be wrong though, she followed on with a shrug. Well, we still need to find a place to hide, said Hinata, pressing her fingers together, trying to think of a place where they could all hide out. She doubted any of them wanted to be alone right now. A resounding crack was heard from nearby, followed by shouts of pervert from several ladies. The young children dropped to the flat of the roof as the ninjas in training did, crawling up to the rim of the roof to peer over the other side. They saw flocks of women who were running around in only towels or simple swimwear, shouting profanities and curses at a man running off into the woods with thick white hair stretching down his back. I think I know just the place, said Hana as a smile spread across her face before turning to the Hyuga heiress. You were right, Hinata, in these situations you just have to relax. Needless to say, the younger ones in the group were confused as a smile spread over Anko's face as well as Hana's. Where am I? Questioned Ino, praying that somebody would answer her. Her arms were wrapped around her body in a type of hug in order to keep herself warm in these damp conditions. She didn't believe her friends were cruel enough to dump her body off in a sewer as a sick type of joke, even though she had only gotten to know a few of them for the last couple of hours. She waded through the shallow water and looked down one of the corridors to see endless nothingness. There was no light source which she could see. She continued moving, scared that as she stood in one place too long it wouldn't result in a happy ending. Hello, Ino cried out loudly, hoping that someone would respond. At this stage she didn't care whether or not the person who talked back was even from Konoha or not, she was downright frightened. Ino stopped in her footsteps, being able to hear the sound of someone else breathing. Her legs took off in a sprint towards the sound. She didn't want to be alone any longer. Running down a corridor, she saw a light down the end and took this as a good sign. When she reached the room, however, she started to wonder whether or not it was such a good idea. The width of the room could easily fit in her clan's household, the overall size overwhelmed her. The frightening part, however, was the metal bars which stretched from the floor to the roof, each individual bar thicker than the trees which surrounded the village. In between the two middle bars there was a piece of paper with writing on it, but she couldn't make out what it said from where she was. A cold chuckle filled the air, sending shivers down her spine, and Ino's being was telling her to get out of there, but she was cemented to the ground by fear, as if by showing her back she would be shot down from behind. Isn't this a surprise? Said a womanly voice, startling Ino somewhat. The first person I have seen in 7 years is nothing but a small child who got lost. Where are you? Shouted Ino, looking around frantically. Another cold chuckle before two large eyes were seen from behind the metal bars. Ino nearly screamed just from the sight of them. They were twice the height of her and were filled with hatred. The only thing that prevented her from screaming out was that she also saw a bit of compassion in them. I have answered your question, now answer mine. Do you seek to harm my kid by moving around in his body? She asked, a threatening growl following. Naruto. No, said Ino, frantically waving her hands wildly. I had to move his body so that we wouldn't get caught. Ino was nearly in tears as she spoke at a rapid pace. If he'd been caught, I don't know what would have happened. After all he's been through today, I'll be surprised if he wakes up bearing the same happiness he usually does, she said, their eyes no longer bearing malice towards the young girl. Before Ino could react, the eyes behind the bars began to shrink rapidly before they were no longer visible. Ino blinked a couple of times, part of her starting to believe that she had gone mad, before an elegant woman stepped out from in between the bars. Ino's jaw dropped at the immense beauty of this woman with flaming red hair and breasts the size of melons. She was able to distinguish this fact pretty quickly due to the fact the woman was completely in the new. Ino forced her eyes upright as the woman stood before her, looking down at the 7-year-old girl with the kindness that a mother would express towards a child. You need not fear me. If you don't wish to harm my kid, then no harm shall fall upon you. Who are you? Asked Ino, words finally forming in her mouth. I think it would be easier to tell you what I am rather than who, she said, waving her hand before her, conjuring 2 seats out of nothingness. Ino wasn't so surprised at what had just happened. She had unintentionally decided that she would just accept anything that happened here. Have a seat, she offered. Thank you, said Ino shyly as she took a seat, her legs compressed together tightly as if trying to take up as little room as possible. Relax, child, if it helps for the moment you may call me Q, she said with a pristine white smile. Ino, she said, introducing herself. Now, things you should know about who I am and in relation to my kit, whom you know as Naruto, started Q, watching as Ino's eyes looked up at her with questions abound. I will simplify this to the best of my being as to not confuse you. I am a being with immense power, strength which you could never comprehend. I was put under a powerful genjutsu and was forced to do things that I am not proud of. In order to protect those he loved, a ninja proclaimed as one of the strongest in the world confronted me with the intention of stopping me. I held no anger towards him, but the person controlling me forced me to attack. After a long battle, he conceded that there was only one way to defeat me, as such I was sealed into this child, costing the ninja his own life in the process. Wow, said Ino mouth agape, as if she had heard the best story of all time. Once I reclaimed my senses I tried to escape, but in doing so I soon realized that the kid's mother had also died, so I took care of him as any mother would, allowing my power to merge with his at certain times in order to help him evade people who tried to hurt him. We have not had the pleasure to meet face to face like you have at the moment, but he is better off in the dark at the moment. So you're the reason Naruto is strong? Asked Ino. Partially, I merely give him the tools, I have no decision on how he uses it nor do I mind. A mother gives a toy to their kid with the intention of playing with it, but they don't care how they play with it. The same can be said about how I give Naruto the chakra that he uses. If he chooses whether to confront or run away from those who harm him, I don't mind. Ino nodded, taking all of this in as Q continued. Our lives are intertwined with one another. In my form at the moment, I can only create places within this space, my true power will always remain behind those bars. If I was to convince someone to tear the seal open I would be free, however Naruto would die in the process. If Naruto were to die in the real world, I would die along with him. So you protect him in order to protect yourself? Asked Ino, getting her head around the concepts. I wouldn't think about it like that, but the way that you put it is true in a sense, said Q, musing over the question. Do you have anything else you want to ask? Where am I? I thought I dispelled my ninjutsu. Asked Ino immediately. There are two things that you didn't count on with your technique, said Q as she began to explain. You know that if your chakra isn't strong enough your technique is disabled, she said, to which Ino nodded. If a person's mind is strong enough to repel your technique you will also be forcibly removed from your target. However, the opposite is true. If the mind of the person is stronger but wills the mind to remain within them, that person is trapped until such a time as they can overpower those keeping them in or they are released. So Naruto is subconsciously keeping me in here even though he's sleeping, stated Ino. No, said Q, shaking her head. Remember, the kid and I are one in body, we are also one in mind. When you disengaged your technique you escaped Naruto's mind but you fell into this one where I reside. Since you are not trying to escape or take control you aren't using any chakra so there is no real danger being here. How can you and Naruto be one in body if you're a girl and he's a boy? Shouldn't you be two spirits sharing the same body? Asked Ino. What you say is correct but there is one mistake saying that we are of different genders, said Q. Naruto's a girl. Ino nearly screamed, hardly believing what she was hearing. It's not that simple, said Q with a sigh as her head bowed low. Why of all places here? Questioned Neji as he stood guard at the front of the door as a group of people walked by but didn't question why the Hyuga boy was standing there. He knew what he needed to say if they asked him anything, but that didn't mean he had to like the plan that Hana and Anko had come up with, those of which were currently behind the door he was guarding. By his feet were the three Heimaru brothers who weren't permitted inside either for some strange reason, Hana saying that they weren't mature enough yet. They, like Neji, had listened but that didn't mean they had to like it. This is the life, said Anko full of joy as she rested within the hot waters of the natural spring, steam rising around the parts of her body which weren't submerged. Next to her rested half a bottle of sake which had been left behind, the only difference being was that it was full when they had gotten here. The only thing which would make this day perfect was if my fucking apartment didn't burn down. Tenten and Hinata gasped as they heard the word, Hana emitting a threatening growl. Anko. Language. Barked Hana baring her teeth. Sorry, 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 shouted Anko, waving her hands back and forth apologetically. It's just been such a stressful day, I just needed to let it all go. We understand, said Tenten, knowing that when Naruto's apartment had been lit on fire, then Tenten's place had a high chance of being damaged as well. I'm sorry for your loss, said Hinata, avoiding eye contact. Don't worry about it, said Anko. Even if you had been there really wasn't much that you could have done. Still, said Hinata, trailing off. She looked up and around at her surroundings, from her clothes on the rocks to the Nod girls she shared the hot spring with. Since the springs had been vacated due to the women chasing a pervert, the girls had snuck in while carrying Naruto and Ino undetected. Neji was then posted on the door with the instructions to tell anybody that wanted to enter that the baths were being used by the Hyuga elders and they wished to remain undisturbed. It then occurred to Hinata that if a Hyuga were to ask the question, Neji would have no suitable answer. She blinked a couple of times though, coming to the conclusion that if she had just realized this, then Neji would have as well and would already be working on a solution. Her eyes then wandered to the unconscious forms of Ino and Naruto lying by the side wall, a thin veil of steam partially blocking them from view. If you didn't know that they were there and weren't close enough, you could easily mistake them for a couple of logs or rocks. Hey Hinata, can I wash your back? Asked Tenten, causing the young Hyuga to gasp before blushing slightly. Tenten giggled slightly as she glided over to the other side of the spring with a sponge in hand. Hinata didn't know where she had gotten the sponge from, and Tenten seemed to see that on her face. One of those women must have left it here, she quickly explained as she got close enough. Hinata nodded before turning around, the soft feel of the sponge running up and down her back sending small shivers down her spine. Hana and Anko smiled at the scene before turning to one another, a predatory smirk spreading across Anko's face. Don't you even think about it, said Hana sternly as she found herself backing away involuntarily as Anko swam closer. You're no fun, sulked Anko as she backed away against the rock wall. Her eyes then glided over to where Naruto was as another smirk came across her face. There was one situation, explained Q, where a couple of drunk people had beaten Naruto to the state of unconsciousness. They didn't feel like they had done enough, however, and one of them run off to grab a pair of scissors, preparing to prevent the kid from bearing any offspring. Ino's hands clasped over her mouth, her father having taught her about the differences about boys and girls since she spent a lot of time around Shikamaru and Choji through weekly gatherings. You mean they? Ino started before stopping, not wanting to say the words that were on her mind. Come on, let's have a look, said Anko, trying to push forward towards the unconscious Naruto, Hana's Nod body pressing against her back as she tried to prevent her from moving forward. Tenten and Hinata were also doing their best to stop Anko from moving forward, each clinging to a leg as their bodies were dragged across the slippery surface. Anko, you're drunk, you're not thinking straight, said Hana, holding on tightly, her sensitive nose able to smell the amount of alcohol that Anko had gone through. Due to the current circumstances, she couldn't blame her for drinking as much as she did, but she didn't like where it was leading. Just a quick peek, said Anko, a slight tinge of red visible on her cheeks. No, repeated Hinata over and over, wanting to keep Naruto's dignity intact. Neji could hear voices shouting at one another from outside the door but feared what might have happened if he stepped inside. Taking the safe option, he silently activated his Byakugan only to have his head shoot backwards, a torrent of blood spurting from his nose. Tenten heard a definitive thud come from outside, but she didn't have time to worry as Anko reached Naruto's body. Moving from one appendage to the next, she let go of the leg and grabbed hold of her arm, pressing it against her chest. She gasped and wanted to let go, but she held on tight, despite the discomfort it caused. Anko still had one free hand, however, and reached down towards Naruto. I'm sorry, Anko-san, said Hinata as she let go of Anko's leg and activated her Byakugan. With a swift strike to the chest, the breath was taken out of Anko before her eyes lost all signs of consciousness. She slumped down into the arms of Tenten and Hinata, who had struggled to keep her upright before Hana helped them lay Ino out on the ground next to Naruto. That's the effect of booze, said Hana, both girls silently forbidding themselves from anything remotely related to alcohol. Good work knocking her out, Hinata. Why did Anko want to see what was under Naruto's pants? Asked Hinata innocently. People do stupid things when they are drunk, their thoughts are confused and they can't think straight, explained Hana as she sat down on the ground slightly exhausted. No, what I meant was, does Naruto have something different than what we do? Asked Hinata, tilting her head slightly to the side as she and Tenten sat on the ground facing Hana. Of course there's something different, said Tenten. What is it? Asked Hinata. Tenten opened her mouth to respond but no words came out. Her daddy had always told her that apart from Brius the only difference between a man and a woman was between their legs, that was all she had been told however. I know there's something different, but I don't know what it is, admitted Tenten bashfully. She then looked towards Hana. Do you know Hana? Hana's jaw dropped wondering how she had gotten stuck into explaining the birds and the bees to children 3 and 4 years younger than her respectively. Her mouth went up and down a couple of times as she tried to think of what to say. You know what we have down there, do you know what it's called? She asked for the 2 girls to shake their heads. For the time being let's call it a Gigi. Now boys, they don't have Gigis, instead they have different things which for now we will call Gigis. Hinata raised a hand, causing Hana to ask, do you have a question? What's a Gigi look like? She asked innocently, causing Hana's face to hit the ground with a smack. Ino waited with bated breath, not knowing whether or not she wanted to hear the last part of the story. Q continued, small injuries that the kid receives I can heal, one of the things I can do however is regrow pieces of the body. Sakura cried into her pillow silently, holding it tight against her face. She lifted her face up towards the window, tears freely streaming down her face over the red mark imprinted on her cheek. She wanted to see her friends, more now than ever in hope that they could help her with the pain, but she had been forbidden from leaving the house until she returned from her shopping venture. Sakura's face fell back into the pillow, not wanting to get hurt again from breaking the rules her mother set again. Her thoughts started to wander, pondering over what her newfound friends would do in this situation. Her mind dwindled on the eldest one, Hana, and wondered what she would do. With renewed vigor Sakura sat upright and brushed the tears from her eyes. She looked towards the closed door before opening the window, allowing a cool breeze to enter the room. Damn the consequences, shouted an inner Sakura surprising the actual Sakura slightly, wondering where this vicious side had come from. Shrugging she crept onto the ledge of the window and analyzed the distance to the nearest roof before pushing off with her feet, landing on the tiles with a thud. Her eyes went wide, realization dawning on her that she was going against her mother before a smile spread across her face. This adrenaline, this rush, she couldn't help but like it. Taking this in stride, she got to her feet and went off in search of her friends. Q sighed, wondering how she could explain such complex issues in a way which wouldn't corrupt Ino. You know of the difference between boys and girls? She asked, to which Ino nodded in acceptance. What these drunk men wanted to do is known as castration, in other words it is the forced removal of the male reproductive organs. Ino swallowed the bile which had been gathering in her throat, the thought of such a terrible thing to someone as young as her was unthinkable. So what happened? She asked. In order to protect the kid and future offspring, I pumped his body full of estrogen, a hormone usually only found in women, said Q as if ashamed by her acts. The alterations were so quick that I couldn't comprehend what had happened at the time. That estrogen is now mixed up in his body for him to access at any time, but it did save him his body parts. I don't understand, asked Ino. I didn't think you would, admitted Q. You know how a henge is able to change a person's appearance, even to that of a different gender, to which Ino nodded, having a basic understanding of the jutsu. With the hormones that I put into Naruto's body, he is able to perform a henge even at his current age and skill, however it is not a jutsu which can be dispelled by anyone else. Instead of using chakra, Naruto will be able to use the hormones in our body to change at will. So Naruto is a boy but can become a girl? Asked Ino, thinking that she was on the right track. Q nodded her head. The only thing which will remain the same are the internal organs, as in Naruto can't have a womb or anything of the sort, only exterior things change. When the men were going to cut his organs off, I did this out of desperation in order to make it that there was nothing to cut off. It was a rash move on my part, but I did what I thought was right. Thankfully Anbu arrived before any other sort of damage could be done. One thing I'm worried about, however, is the possibility of Naruto developing multiple personality disorder. Multiple personality disorder, repeated Ino, unsure of what that was. Multiple personality disorder, put simply, is a disease of the mind, where one person believes that they are different people. Some people who have done horrendous things in their life create an alternate person to become an escape from what they have done. Sometimes they can go deep enough that their mind tricks them into becoming a different person altogether. If Naruto taps into his female form, he might create an alternate personality in order to escape from all the hate that he had suffered. If this happens, I want you and your friends to help him. If he continuously swaps from one form to another, there might be a possibility that he doesn't remember what happened to him when he was in his other form. If he constantly triggers this, it will be a way that he can escape from it all. What do I tell them? Asked Ino. Explain what I have told you, but do so without telling them who I am, otherwise too many questions may be asked, explained Q. When Naruto wakes up, he will be in so much pain. Everything he owned, everything he has strived to achieve thus far has been destroyed. He is lucky he has found friends such as yourself to help him. Q leant forward and brushed Ino's hair out of her face. I'm not sure if I understand, said Ino, slightly confused. You don't have to fully understand, just do what is right, said Q as the landscape around Ino began to warp. Can I talk to you again? Asked Ino as Q began to disappear. Hopefully not, said Q before she vanished in a flash of white as Ino's eyes shot open. Ino sat upright, beads of sweat leaking down her forehead. Her hands patted herself down before she breathed a sigh of relief, happy to be back in her own body again. Her hearing picked up the sound of people talking nearby and she quickly got to her feet, needing to tell everyone of what had just happened. Her process, however, was faltered as she tripped over something large. Ino screamed before she landed on something soft, her hands splayed at awkward angles. She looked up slightly confused to find that she had tripped over the sleeping body of Naruto. What she had landed on, however, was a sleeping Anko, Ino's hand having landed on her bare braias. Ino pushed herself off as quickly as she could, the pressure on Anko's braias causing a moan of pleasure to escape the sleeping girl's lips. Is anyone there? Asked a timid Hinata from the other side of the steam. I'm awake, said Ino, alerting the others of her presence. She then turned her attention to Naruto. Give me a minute, I just have to check something, she called out before she knelt down. Naruto, I'm sorry for this, please forgive me, she said before she pulled down Naruto's pants. So that's how it is, finished Ino as she finished her story to Hinata, Tenten, Hana, along with the now awake and sober Anko and Neji, who had been allowed in once all the girls were decent. The door was still guarded, however, by the Heimaru brothers. Ino had repeated everything she had learned in her conversation with Q while not mentioning who had taught her this information, praying that the others wouldn't force her to reveal that information. This is a very difficult thing to believe, said Neji, looking over at the sleeping boy. She has no reason to lie to us about something like this, we should believe what she says, said Hinata before looking at her cousin and gasping. Did you get in a fight, Neji? There's blood all over your clothes. Neji stuttered slightly as he recalled the image he had seen with his Byakugan, and he fought to prevent any more blood from leaking out of his nose. Yes, a fight, he said quickly to get the attention off of him. Don't worry, I'm fine now. Hinata only shrugged as she turned back to the group conversation. So this stuff you learned in his mind, did you mean it to happen? Asked Anko. No, it sort of all just came at me at once, explained Ino. I didn't have any control over what I was learning. How do we know he hasn't already, changed? Said Tenten, looking for the right word. I checked, he's still male, said Ino, causing a number of jaws to drop. How come she can check and I can't? Exclaimed Anko. Because you would do naughty things to Naruto, said Hinata, immediately regretting the words coming out of her mouth as Anko sent a death glare in her direction. Neji prepared himself to leap in and come to Hinata's defense, but Anko just burst out into laughter. I'm not really in a position to say that I wouldn't have, she said as she rubbed the back of her head. Alright, now that that's out of the way, first thing is first, said Hana, thinking it over. The most important thing that we need to address is a temporary location for Naruto to stay. He is staying at our house tonight, explained Neji. He is, gasped Hinata as the bombs went off around her. When did this happen? After I investigated the accident, I went and talked to both my father and yours and told them the situation. They said that it would be alright for him to stay the night, explained Neji as Hinata ran through all the possibilities of what could happen with Naruto staying at their house. However, the possibility of him staying longer than a night did not look favorable. That may be tonight sorted, but it's not enough, said Anko. From my missions I have enough money to buy a one-bedroom apartment, but Naruto doesn't have any money. Whatever he had been saving would have gone up in the fire. We could swap him between households every night, but that could create problems in itself, said Tenten. I don't mind him staying at my place, but after seeing how people act around him it might be bad for business. You're right, even though I don't want to admit it, said Hana. Not only that, but the council would soon be on our backs and we would never hear the end of it. We could get away with it for 1, maybe 2 weeks before problems start to arise. Stupid council, muttered Anko under her breath. That only surrounds the male Naruto though, said Hinata, causing everyone to look at the Hyuga girl. The people only know of the existence of the male Naruto, they've never seen this female form you talked about, she continued, indicating to Ino as she did. If he was to be in his female form, we could make it look completely different to his male form and we won't have these sort of troubles. While that's a good idea, I don't think we should try and force him into this form, said Hana. Me might not think it is such a bad idea though, said Anko. He's played pranks on the villagers for as long as I can remember, he would likely just consider this to be one of them. The problem is he doesn't know about this form yet, or at least we don't know if he knows about his female side, said Ino. If he ends up with multiple personality disorder, who's to say that he won't remain in his female form forever? Especially if he develops a persona that makes him forget about who Naruto actually is, said Hana, causing a few eyebrows to raise. Think about it, if he becomes this new person we can train him to be a solid kunoichi, but that doesn't mean that when he transfers back to his male self all of the skills will pass over. What you say makes sense, analyzed Neji, going over all the information in his head. At the moment we can assume that if his current state isn't enough to force him into this form, another large shock will do it. You said earlier, Anko, that he has been taking his anger out on trees to get it out of his system. We can say that he won't do anything of the sort at the moment, since he wouldn't want to do anything like that while we are around. When we get back to my place tonight I'll spar with him again, that way he can release some anger in a controlled environment. That works, said Tenten. If what you're saying is right, then that would mean that it would be less likely that he would want to change as a person. I think we can only make assumptions at the moment, we don't even know when this will happen, if at all, said Anko, standing upright, closely followed by everyone else in the group. No matter what happens we can't let anybody know about this, especially Naruto. The others could only nod in agreement. If Naruto knew what he was capable of, it could have very negative consequences. All their heads quickly shot over to said boy as they heard him stir. Within seconds they had all rushed to his side as he lifted his head off of the ground, rubbing it lightly. He blinked a couple of times as he turned his head to see a flood of faces looking back at him. Did I do something wrong? He asked, only to be embraced in a hug by Hinata and Tenten. We were so worried, said Tenten, fighting back tears which began to swell in her eyes. Worried about what? Asked Naruto before everything started to come flooding back to him. His cheerful expression suddenly became very distraught as sadness seemed to seep through his being. Could you excuse me for a second? I want to be alone for a while. They could immediately understand why he asked for it, but were cautious about letting him do so. Nevertheless, they allowed him to get to his feet and walk slowly out of the room. Hana then grabbed Neji by the shoulder. Trail him, make sure he doesn't do anything to harm himself, and please ensure he doesn't do anything stupid, she said. I understand, said Neji as he bowed his head. Before he left he turned to Hinata. I would return to the clan household and prepare a room for Naruto to stay in tonight, preferably near our own. Since your room is near the center of the compound it would be difficult for anyone to get to him. Hinata nodded her head in understanding before Neji made his way to the door, his mission painfully clear. Something just suddenly dawned on Ino. Oh crud, she lightly cursed, picking up the attention of those around her. What is it? Asked Hana. Ino looked at her with an irritated face. We need to explain this all to Sakura, don't we? Neji trailed Naruto from a distance, the sun in the sky already on its steady descent towards the horizon. Neji figured that there was a little over an hour before the sun finally set. He couldn't help but wonder how quickly the day had come to a close. He backtracked in his movements a bit as he saw Naruto slow down. He leapt behind a tree as quickly as he could, fearing that he had been noticed despite the fact he was doing his best to remain hidden. Safely hidden, he activated his Byakugan to look at Naruto despite not being visible. He saw that he was looking away from him, down towards a lake. What he was looking at he couldn't tell since his eyesight didn't stretch that far. He breathed a sigh of relief as Naruto continued his trek, allowing his Byakugan to disengage. Coming out from his hiding spot, he saw Naruto making his way up an isolated path towards the Hokage monument. Neji followed but allowed a second to look at what Naruto had looked at to see a young Uchiha sitting on a jetty, looking out to the crystal water in front of him. He decided not to worry about this for the moment as he followed Naruto down the path. A few more minutes passed before Naruto took an unexpected turn towards an old abandoned house. Neji looked on in confusion. The house had once belonged to Namikaze Minato, the fourth Hokage of Konoha and hailed as a legend among shinobi. The house was large, larger than the entire Hyuga compound, yet it was also out of the way of town a bit, away from the normal bustle of the townsfolk. The real danger of the house, however, was the seal placed on the gates. It was common knowledge that the fourth Hokage had been a seal master, and apparently the one which allowed access to his house was no exception. From what he had heard, the seal could only be broken by a handful of people, but there was a rumor which said that the seal would break for the Yondaime's legacy, whatever that meant. Neji watched from his hiding spot as Naruto sat down at the base of the solid gate with his back to it, gently resting his head on the bars below the complex seal imprinted on the gate. There had been stories of people who had tried to break into the Yondaime's mansion and they weren't pretty, so much as touching the seal could cause immense pain, or so he had heard. This also meant that the area was a perfect hiding place, as people would have believed that the place would have become haunted or something along those lines. Neji sat in the branches of the tree, watching as Naruto continued to wallow in what he could only guess was grief. There was one thing he had never expected to happen, however, which nearly caused him to fall out of the tree he was in. He could do nothing but watch as Sakura Haruno walked up to Naruto. Finally found you, she said breathless as she put her hands on her knees. She had been searching for the group for a long time but had been unable to find anyone, probably because they had been hiding in order to protect Naruto. Hey Sakura, said Naruto, wiping the tears from his eyes before looking up at the pink-haired girl. What happened to your face? He asked, indicating the red mark on her cheek. Nothing, it's nothing, said Sakura, trying to brush it off. Naruto had unintentionally reminded her that she had snuck out of home, and no doubt her mother had figured it out by now. She was surprised that Anbu weren't raining from the sky trying to find her. How are you feeling? Naruto didn't respond with words. His body actions were more than enough as he pulled his legs into his chest and hugged them tightly. Sakura didn't know what she could say to help the blonde-haired boy, so she said nothing, instead opting to sit down next to him and allow his head to rest on her shoulder. Neji smiled lightly at the scene as he let them rest in silence for a number of minutes. He had immediately known that Sakura wasn't aware of what Naruto could do, so he had had to pray that she didn't do anything which would have risked anything major from happening. Seeing them sit there in silence, he began to realize how late in the day it was and knew that he had to take Naruto to his clan's compound. Leaping from the tree, he made his way towards Naruto in a calm manner. Naruto, he said, causing Sakura and Naruto's heads to shoot up. Clearly they had been enjoying the peace between one another. We need to leave now if we are to be able to be at my home in time for dinner. Your home? Asked Naruto, tilting his head to the side, confused. You are staying at our place for the night, confirmed Neji. Naruto nodded in understanding before getting to his feet alongside Sakura, pushing against the metal gate behind him for support. Neji shuddered and took a step back as he noticed that Naruto's hand was placed directly on top of the seal, keeping the gate shut. When nothing happened, however, he visibly relaxed, realizing that what he had heard was nothing but rumors. I don't want to go home tonight, said Sakura, fearing what her mother might say or do when she returned. I would suggest you go stay with Ino, said Neji. I believe she has some important information she wants to share with you. I assume that will be no problem. Okay then, said Sakura, knowing that it was times like this when you could count on your closest friends. The three of them began to walk slowly down the pathway, oblivious to the fact that the metal gate had swung open by the slightest of margins. That was a great meal, exclaimed Naruto as he stretched after dinner, his arms extended high in the air. He was wearing some of Neji's old pajamas which fit him rather well and was now in the room he was going to be spending the night. I'm glad you enjoyed it, said Hinata, avoiding eye contact. She wanted to remind Naruto that they had eaten well over an hour ago and were now bathed and ready for bed, but she didn't want to sour his mood. Naruto replayed the scene over in his mind, putting the vast amounts of food he had been allowed to eat behind for a moment. He had noticed the people around him. Many of the elders looked at him with a slight notion of disgust, but he was used to that and thus didn't mind. The others seemed to not care or looked at him with emotionless expressions, a trend he noticed in the Hyuga compound. He swore the only expression they were capable of showing was anger. Yet his hypothesis would be incorrect due to one little girl. Hanabi was Hinata's younger sister, merely 3 years of age. At dinner he had noticed her looking at him with confusion, as if wondering why someone not from their family was allowed to eat at the same table with them. Naruto had brushed it off, however, believing it was just because she was a child that had little experience in the outside world. That would also explain why when he looked at the sliding door he could see her peering from around it. He gave a gentle wave, but it seemed to scare her as she gasped and closed the door, not wanting to be caught. He chuckled at the notion before turning to Hinata. Where do you sleep, Hinata? He asked. I'm just in the room next door, Naruto-kun, she said bashfully. If you want to talk to me about anything you can come see me. I'll be sure to do that, said Naruto as he got onto his futon and tried to make himself comfy. Did you want to talk, Hanabi? He asked, noticing the girl was looking again. This time, however, she seemed to hold her nerve as she opened the door fully and allowed herself in. Naruto sat up to face her. Sitting down, he was still taller than her, if only by an inch. Why are you here? She asked with the demeanor that Hiashi had spoken to Naruto with during dinner. Hanabi, don't be rude, scolded Hinata at her sister's behavior. It's all right, said Naruto, lifting a hand at Hinata in order to calm her down slightly. My place got broke, so I was given an offer to stay here for the night, he explained, simplifying it for Hanabi. I see, said Hanabi, taking Naruto's words in. How'd your home break? Some people don't like me, so they broke my house in order to show their hatred towards me, said Naruto. Why do people not like you? She asked. Naruto opened his mouth to answer, but in truth he didn't know the answer either. He didn't know whether or not he had wronged somebody in a past life or if his parents had done something to anger the village before he was born, but he couldn't produce a solid answer. Hanabi, said Hinata, sternly telling her sister off. It's all right, said Naruto, standing up. He walked into the wardrobe where he had placed his clothes before adorning his usual attire a minute later. I'm just going to go outside for a while. Hanabi and Hinata watched in silence as Naruto walked towards the family training ground. Hanabi, why'd you ask something like that? Asked Hinata in a firm voice. I just wanted to know, said Hanabi innocently. Hinata's head dropped at her sister's innocence. Sometimes there are things you don't want to know, she said, unable to look at her sister. They stood there in silence before Hanabi walked up and latched to Hinata's leg. I'm sorry, she apologized, small tears forming in her eyes. It's all right, said Hinata, lowering herself to Hanabi's level. You didn't know. Now let's say we go find Naruto and make sure he doesn't get lost. Hanabi could only nod as she wiped small tears out of her eyes with the hem of her sleeve. It didn't take long to find him. He was standing in the middle of the training ground, his unzipped jacket flaying slightly in the wind as he stared down Neji, who stood opposite him. Let's conclude what we started, said Neji as he activated his Byakugan and slipped into his stance. No holding back. Naruto smiled as he tossed his orange jacket to the side. He slipped into the stance he had taken earlier in the day, but spreading his legs slightly wider, allowing his knees to bend at the joints.